Star Wars draws from many inspirations, including films, comic books, science fiction, and most importantly, ancient myths. After The Force Awakens hit theaters, the internet was flooded with fan theories. One of our favorites is that the film is actually a sly retelling of the myth of King Arthur. Force Awakens not only copied the original trilogy, but it shares many story elements with the Knights of Camelot. Now, the Arthur story doesn't have one agreed-upon canon. Arthur lore has slowly evolved over 1,600 years. It's been interpreted as a musical, a cartoon, Jax Teller punching the air really fast, so the continuity of both Arthur and Star Wars are fluid and ever-changing.
I built C-3PO.
According to J.J. Abrams, doing a story that took place nearly 40 years after Jedi meant that there would be a generation for whom Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Leia would be as good as myth. They'd be as old and as mythic as the tales of King Arthur. And Star Wars has always been influenced by medieval storytelling. The opening title could have just as well read Once Upon a Time. Even the characters in the first film fit fairy tale archetypes. The commoner, the rogue, the princess, the wizard, and the wise fools. Obi-Wan's words about the lightsaber,
elegant weapon for a more civilized age,
invoke a time of chivalrous knights, keeping the king's peace across the countryside. The Jedi Knights are similar to Camelot's Knights of the Round Table. They sit in a circle where every knight has an equal voice. They're selfless, but are ultimately destroyed from within. The parallels between Luke and Arthur have been evident from the start. He was an orphan, hidden away in a time of war as his kingdom was falling apart. Arthur falls under the guidance of a wise old wizard, Merlin, who knew his father and helped him obtain a sword that is his birthright. Merlin tells Arthur his true heritage, as Obi-Wan eventually gets around to telling Luke. Like Merlin, Obi-Wan ends up in a state between life and death. Anakin Skywalker resembles the saga's Lancelot. It was Lancelot's forbidden love for Guinevere that drove him from Camelot and fractured the Round Table. So what does this have to do with The Force Awakens? Well, consider this timeline. The prequel trilogy dealt with the fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. The classic trilogy was about the fall of the Roman Empire. The sequel trilogy then covers the Middle Ages, during the decline of Rome. This is the period of chivalrous knights, kings and castles, and
the Knights who say nay.
The King Arthur myth rose between the 5th and 12th centuries, spanning the time when Rome left Britain and the Crusades began. The new Star Wars trilogy is taking several cues from this period. First of all, there are obvious design choices. Maz Kanata lives in a castle decorated with medieval banners, and Captain Phasma wears shining silver armor, and does nothing else. Why does this random stormtrooper get to fight Finn instead of a badass Gwendolyn Christie? Kylo Ren's sword features a medieval-era crossguard, and he wears a tunic. He also leads a group called the Knights of Ren, who seem to wear helmets similar to medieval knights. Speaking of Kylo Ren, his Arthurian parallel is Mordred, King Arthur's nephew and his son. Ben Solo is Luke's nephew and his figurative son. We hope. Luke trained Ben, and according to the novel Bloodline, the pair spent a great deal of time together traveling across the galaxy. Like Mordred, Ben Solo is one of his uncle's knights, but betrays him to seize the kingdom for himself. Mordred was controlled by his mother, Morgan Le Fay. It's too early to tell if Supreme Leader Snoke parallels her in many ways, but in the original script, Snoke was supposed to be a woman. Also, Ben Solo is actual royalty. He's heir to the throne of Alderaan. What's left of it. Medieval mythology is filled with quests for holy relics. Christian artifacts from the ancient world include pieces of the True Cross, the Shroud of Turin, the Veil of Veronica, and the Holy Foreskin. Yes, that's a real thing. Relics also play a major part in The Force Awakens. Rey lives in, scavenges, and wears artifacts of war. Kylo Ren worships Vader's helmet. The plot revolves around a fragmented map to Luke Skywalker, and the lightsaber itself is a relic hidden in the catacombs of a castle. The Excalibur of Star Wars is Luke and Anakin's lightsaber, a sword passed down through generations. Like the famous sword, it can only be drawn by someone who is worthy to wield it. Kylo Ren believes the lightsaber is his birthright, but Rey pulls it from the snow just as Luke did before her. This is an obvious metaphor for the Sword in the Stone. By the way, the scene in the cartoon Sword in the Stone when the girl squirrel gets her heart broken is really, really sad. And there's a clue to her royal heritage in her name. Rey means king in Spanish. In some versions of the story, after Excalibur is drawn, it's given to the Lady of the Lake until Arthur is grown and ready to wield it. Luke loses the lightsaber because, as Yoda says,
Not ready for the burden, were you?
Afterwards, it ends up with Maz Kanata, whose castle is on a lake. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the most important Christian artifact of all.
This is the Holy Grail.
The Grail is described as a beacon of hope, just as Luke Skywalker was described as a new hope. The Force Awakens centers around the quest for Luke Skywalker, but he isn't the end goal.
If Skywalker returns, the new Jedi will rise.
Before Lor San Taka gives Poe Dameron in the map, he says,
Without the Jedi, there can be no balance in the Force.
Luke is the key to the restoration of the Jedi Order and bringing balance back to the Force. In Arthurian lore, the Knights of the Round Table seek the Grail because pestilence has covered the kingdom. In the same way, the First Order is covering the galaxy with the dark side of the Force. This is where Rey comes in. Her parallel is Percival, who's also sometimes called Galahad. Percival survives when all the other Knights of the Round Table are killed, just as Rey is Force-sensitive but survives the Second Jedi Massacre. Merlin tells Percival to seek the Grail, just as Obi-Wan's voice guides Rey to find Luke. God shows Percival a vision of the Grail because he is the only knight pure enough to claim it. Similarly, Rey has visions of...
You imagine an ocean. I see it. I see the island.
which turns out to be the hiding place of Luke Skywalker. Rey's name means light, and light is the key metaphor of this film. Kylo Ren frequently says that he's tempted by
The pull to the light.
And during the trench run, Poe says,
"Remember, when the sun is gone, that weapon will be ready to fire. But as long as there's light, we got a chance."
And Kylo Ren kills his father when light disappears from the sky. Percival finds the Grail being safeguarded by a wounded king called the Fisher King.
No. I'm a knight.
Much like Luke is carrying internal wounds after his failure to restore a new Jedi Order. In Arthurian lore, King Arthur was defeated in battle and brought to a hidden island called Avalon to die. After Kylo Ren's betrayal, Luke retreats to a hidden island on a planet that's mostly ocean. Excalibur was forged on Avalon, just as this planet, Act 2, is the site of the first Jedi Temple. Avalon is hidden by mists and can only be found by a chosen few. Luke has been hiding on this island for years. No one, not even his sister, is able to find him. Another bit of lore says that Arthur didn't die,
is only mostly dead.
and that someday he would return when Britain needed him. That's why he's called the once and future king. In the same way, Luke can return to help bring balance to the Force. This was filmed on an island called Skellig Michael. It is the site of a Christian monastery built in the early Middle Ages, when Arthurian lore first began. It's a fitting site for a religious knight wearing a monk's robes to retreat for prayer and meditation. And, like its metaphorical counterpart, Skellig Michael is nearly inaccessible for most of the year. The question is, did J.J. Abrams do all of this on purpose? Even if he didn't, these myths have permeated our culture for hundreds of years, so they resonate with us. However, seeds for this idea were planted by George Lucas before the ink was even dry on his original trilogy.
He at one time said, would you consider playing an Obi-Wan type character handing Excalibur down to the next generation? I said, when would that be? And at the time he said around 2011.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.